life can sometimes be difficult, especially for those who always have to struggle throughout it. Take, for example, the millions of people around the world who are raised in a negative struggle known to many as the hood. You see, coming out of the hood is a dream for most, but only few actually ever make it out. Same goes for NBA players. Many of the stars we now recognize, such as Dwayne Wade, Jimmy Butler, Allen Iverson, and even NBA superstar LeBron James, have all struggled to rise out from the negativity of the street life. However, the same cannot be said for NBA player Javaris Crittenton. For him, entering the NBA was only the beginning of a life many wish they had never known. Many of you guys may recognize him for his infamous locker room standoff with teammate and fellow hothead Gilbert Arenas. However, what if I was to tell you that this player has an even darker story? Welcome to NBA Insider. Born in Atlanta on December 31, 1987, Javaris Crittenton grew up with his mother. From a young age, it was clear that he was supposedly destined for greatness. As a young teenager, he attended Southwest Atlanta Christianity High School, where along with NBA player Dwight Howard, he would lead the school to a state championship in his sophomore year while averaging 20-plus points and 8 rebounds. In his junior year, he would lose in the finals to Randolph-Clay High School. However, Crittenton would get his revenge in his senior year, averaging 29 points, 9 assists, and 7 rebounds, and eventually beat Randolph-Clay in the finals. Overall, Javaris was an outstanding student, player, and leader. He would eventually graduate high school with a 3.5 GPA, while also being recognized as a basketball star and receiving honors such as Mr. Georgia Basketball, a McDonald All-American, and even 2 championships. He was definitely the man, on and off the court. In college, Crittenton's skills would continue to impress as his head coach, Paul Hewitt, who decided to make him the team leader for Georgia Tech in just his freshman year, was excited to have the player under his wing. However, Javaris would end up spending just 1 year in college before deciding to enter the 2007 NBA draft. After being selected 19th overall by the Los Angeles Lakers, he would go on to impress in the Summer League, dropping 18 points against the Golden State Warriors in his very first game. While this would be considered by many individuals as a great start to a successful life, what if I was to tell you that this would actually be the start of an even greater nightmare? You see, for a man who had always been the star attraction, the NBA was a rude awakening for Javaris Crittenton. Throughout his short career, Javaris would go on to play for the LA Lakers, Memphis Grizzlies, and Washington Wizards in a total of 113 games. However, on all 3 teams, he had never played as a starter. To top it off, he had never averaged higher than 7.4 points per game. In 2008, following a weak performance between the Grizzlies and Lakers, Crittenton would eventually be traded to the Washington Wizards as a 6th man of sorts, while playing alongside a young JaVale McGee, Gilbert Arenas, and his good friend Caron Butler. Despite turning a new page with the Wizards, Javaris would somehow continue to come across a variety of negative experiences. Take, for example, December 19th of 2009. On this day, the Washington Wizards team was on a flight back to Washington when Crittenton and former teammate Gilbert Arenas decided to indulge in a game of cards. According to former teammate Caron Butler's popular book, Tough Juice, following a round of play, a heated exchange had taken place between the two. After landing in Washington, both men would head their separate ways, but not before Arenas would shockingly tell Crittenton, "I play with guns," to which Crittenton would immediately reply saying, "I play with guns too." What makes this even crazier is the fact that Caron Butler would later on expose that the airplane card game that led to the initial beef was all over $1,100, just $1,100. At the time, everyone had thought that this was just emotion being played out and that neither of the individuals actually meant what they said. However, only a few people had known just how deep and true those words really were. On December 21st, 2009, just 2 days later, the Washington Wizards had a 10 o'clock practice at the Verizon Center. Javaris and Arenas would once again be involved in a heated altercation, this time in a locker room showdown. It was one of the most unbelievable, mind-boggling sports stories of the 21st century. As he finished up the remaining time of his practice, Caron Butler would head towards the locker room. As he entered, he had noticed Gilbert Arenas standing in front of what appeared to be 4 guns on display. Right beside that, Javaris was standing in front of his own stall with his back to Gilbert. "Hey, come pick one," Gilbert told Javaris while pointing to his weapons. "I'm going to shoot your bleep off with one of these." "Oh no, you don't need to shoot me with one of those," said Javaris, turning around slowly. "I've got one right here." He pulled out his own gun, already loaded, cocked it, and pointed it at Gilbert. Other players who had been casually arriving, laughing and joking with each other, came to a sudden halt with a look of shock on their faces. It took them only a few seconds to realize this was for real, a shoot-around of a whole different nature. They all looked at each other and they ran, with the last man out locking the door behind them. Somebody outside the locker room immediately called 911. Even Flip Saunders, who was the coach back then, was too scared to come into the locker room. However, after receiving career-saving advice from an older and more experienced Butler, both men would eventually calm down. Javaris slowly lowered the gun and Arenas would remove himself from the scene. In the end, Arenas would be charged with gun possession and serve 30 days in the halfway house. And although Gilbert may have played with the guns, he was no gangster. Sadly, Crittenton was. The former Georgia Tech star, who was 21 at the time of the incident, never played again in the NBA. What's even more disappointing is that following a short playing career in China in the D-League, Javaris Crittenton would be arrested. On August 19, 2011, Javaris Crittenton's life and career would officially come to a tragic end. You see, what many people did not know was that Crittenton was a member of a well-known gang called the Mansfield Gangster Crips. On this fateful day, a then 24-year-old Crittenton was attempting to seek revenge on an individual named Trontavious Stevens, who was a rival blood gang member associated with another local gang called the ROC Crew. Javaris had allegedly claimed to have been robbed by Stevens sometime in the weeks leading up to this incident. Out of revenge and to teach him a lesson, Crittenton went after Stevens' life. After spending a decent amount of time on recon and planning, Crittenton orchestrated a drive-by aimed for Stevens. What's even crazier is that Javaris had also allegedly shot at DeMontanez Stevens, Trontavious Stevens' brother, earlier in that year, so his intentions were more than clear. Javaris would eventually catch Trontavious while he was out with his brother. However, the plan would take an unfortunate turn of events. Rather than to shoot his intended target, the self-admitted Crip completely missed and instead shot 22-year-old Julian Jones, an innocent bystander who also happened to be a mother of 4. And although Jones was only shot in the leg, she would still sadly pass away while undergoing surgery at the hospital. After failing his attempt to wipe out his enemies and unknowingly taking an innocent life, Javaris would flee the scene and go into hiding. However, on August 26, 2011, police would eventually apprehend Javaris and arrest him in connection to the murder. Crittenton, along with his cousin, Douglas Gamble, were officially indicted on April 2, 2013 on 12 counts in connection with Jones's death, including charges of murder, felony murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, giving false statements, attempted murder, and participation in criminal street gang activity. The charges would later on be reduced, but would still include voluntary manslaughter with a weapon, aggravated assaults with a firearm, 2 counts of conspiracy to violate the Controlled Substance Act in Georgia, and much more. On April 29th of 2015, years following the incident, Javaris Crittenton would eventually plead guilty to the charges and was sentenced to a shocking 23 years behind bars. This meant that he would only walk as a free man again in the year 2038. What makes this even more disappointing was the fact that Javaris would later on reveal that he had joined the gang shortly after signing with the Lakers in his rookie season. When asked why, he would tell prosecutors that he did it for quote-unquote protection. While this may not sound very convincing, it is quite a common occurrence and the same answer most professional athletes who are affiliated to gangs give, and something the authorities are well aware of. And although we will never know how and when exactly Crittenton came to become a gunslinging gang member, what we accept is that his story is one of loss. Not only was he missing shots on the court, but off the court as well. Once a star player with an intelligent mind and promising future, now an NBA scrub and convicted murderer. It's sad to say that that Javaris Crittenton essentially ended what could have been a successful career and will easily go down as one of the more disappointing players in NBA history.